Welcome to the Savvy Young Professional Podcast. My name is Tanita Mullen, and I am the host of the show. Today, we have a guest on the show who is going to talk to us about something we all want to do. Every single one of us, I'm sure. And that is travel the world. I can tell you all the time when I ask and talk to people about what it is they want to do, somewhere and somehow travel is involved in those conversations. So Stephanie is going to be here today to talk to us about how we can travel but still live our day-to-day life and even work our 40-hour-a-week jobs. Stephanie Huston is an inspired adventurer traveler and an influencer who wants to see every country in the world. She has so far traveled to 35 countries and 111 cities across 7 continents. She is currently on a mission to explore all 50 U.S. states and only has 6 left to go. Stephanie works full-time in the ad tech industry in New York City and is a contributing writer for places like Huffington Post, writing about how to live a successful, inspired life, dominate your career, and make an impact while traveling the world. She's really passionate about professional development and also passionate about women succeeding in business. She volunteers for United Women in Business Foundation and has served on the board of directors. Stephanie is going to talk to us today about what to do when you are ready to travel the world. She's going to talk to us about how easy it is to really travel. So if you are ready to throw on that travel backpack and hit the globe, stay tuned. Welcome to the Savvy Young Professional, Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we had a little chat right before we started recording, but I want you to go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about you and give us some background information before we get started.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time and a huge fan of the podcast. My name is Stephanie Huston, aka Strategic Steph or Strategic Stephanie. I work full-time at Taboola, based in New York City, and I've lived in NYC for the past 10 years. I'm a world traveler. I've been to 7 continents across 35 countries, and as I was just saying before, have done it all while working full-time on limited vacation days and limited vacation budget as well.
Wow. That sounds like a dream for a lot of us. And so I can't wait for us to talk about that. So you've been at an ad agency. Is that your background? Did you always work in that industry?
Yeah. So in college, my major was communications and public relations and advertising. My first 3 years in New York, I was working for like a full, a marketing agency basically, but was specializing in print production. And then 3 years into that, in like 2011, realized I needed to get more into the digital side. So I've been working in digital the past 7 years, and now I work for Taboola, not necessarily an ad agency, but we are a content discovery platform, so kind of like native advertising. When you're reading an article at the bottom of the website, you will probably see content you may like or recommended content. And Taboola partners with thousands of websites to promote our different products and different blog posts and stuff like that other people run on our site.
Wow. That sounds really interesting. I'm thinking about all the articles I've read and thinking about like how I end up getting to like 5 websites deep. And I'm like, how did I get here? But that's good. I mean, we're in that age, we're in digital world. So I think it's a pretty creative thing to do to try to figure out how people can kind of stay engaged in online content. So you are a world traveler. Tell me how someone gets that title of world traveler. I mean, I know because I've read your bio, but I want to kind of get to how you ended up getting so excited about travel to where you started to have these travel goals and become an influencer in that industry.
Yeah, well, so I've always loved traveling. I was lucky enough to have parents that took us on a trip each year, and so growing up, I mostly went to the Caribbean and around the States. But when I got to college, my parents really encouraged me to study abroad, and so my freshman year, I did a 3-week course in Spain, and that was my very first time in Europe. I was 19 years old and just kind of fell in love with the whole experience. I was a disaster. I didn't know how to get anywhere, how to properly read a map or pack a backpack. I was carrying around a huge suitcase, but I just kind of, kept going and kept learning and improving every time. Every trip that I went on, and just every country that I went, I figured out 3 more that I wanted to go to, and knew that I had to do it, cheap and smart, and just kind of went at it as strategically as possible, which is how I got my nickname, Strategic Steph. And so just figuring out how to work, a couple countries into a long weekend, or a couple continents into a week-long trip, and just made it work while I was working full time.
Yeah. And just for clarification, because we talked about this and I actually read about this about you, but you hold a full-time job that before, in the beginning, when you started traveling, it wasn't a job that you had to travel for. So these were trips and things that you were planning on truly your vacation in your free time.
Yes, correct. So in the past 10 years is when I've done most of my traveling. And so far I'm at 7 continents, 35 countries, over 111 cities, and 44 U.S. states. And I've had anywhere from 9 to 20 vacation days a year, ranging back all the way to 2008. And so just figuring out how to best work it into, my work schedule, planning in advance. I've always negotiated for more vacation days or work from home days or half days or stuff like that. But because I've always, also prioritized and loved my career and my job, was always able to find that negotiation flexibility, because I was doing a great job. And so they would allow me to, travel and make things work that way.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about, I guess, the first stretch of travel that you had. So you've been traveling for 10 years. You decided, you know what, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make this work. I guess in the beginning, tell us about those beginning stages when you were just trying to figure out how to make this work within your work schedule. Was it easy? Did you find it to be challenging in the beginning? And what did you learn those first couple of years?
So my biggest piece of advice would just be to be as strategic and organized as possible. I always say, people, always say it's a dream job or a dream, life to travel and to work. But for me, it's I've never been the smartest or the most technical person in the room, but I'm always the most organized and I can always outwork anyone else. And so for me, I wasn't the smartest. I didn't, come from money or have, I was making $40,000 a year salary. But what I did was just break everything down into, all my goals into chunks. And if I wanted to get to, I started small, these, the past couple of years, I've been able to do a lot bigger trips. But when I was 21, 22, I would aim to do 1 or 2 countries a year. And say, okay, if I want to do a trip to Paris, this is how much it would cost. And I have Google Docs upon Google Docs for everything. And I would just, do all the research of what's the cheapest place I could stay, what's the cheapest way to eat, what's the cheapest way to get there, to get in between cities, or flying into London and being able to do a train trip to 3 different cities within a couple days. And so just being strategic and organized about everything and breaking it down and planning in advance. If you want to go to Paris, don't say, okay, if I can't go in 2 months, then I'm not going to go. Plan it for a year in advance. Planning is half the fun.
Yeah, I would, I'm not the most organized person. So when I was hearing you talk about that, I'm like, I guess I'm thinking the more you do it, I'm sure the more addictive it becomes. And you're you want to figure out how to do it. You want to figure out how to make it work because it becomes kind of like a challenge.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's a challenge of saying like, okay, I make $40,000 a year salary and I only have, $3,000 for traveling. So what can I do? And even if it means saving for 11 months before you can do that trip, then it's worth it to go somewhere instead of, spending the money somewhere else. And so it definitely taught me discipline as well of saying, planning things out in advance and then making sure that I'm saving and working towards those.
What do you think is that connection between your work life and your personal life when it comes to travel? Because I know I hear people say all the time, I can't afford it. I can't go. I don't have enough time. I don't make enough, or whatever the excuse may be. But what have you learned as far as traveling and that connection to work? How has that affected your work?
Yeah, I mean, for me, traveling has really opened up like my mind to so many different cultures, ideas. It's helped me become more adaptable and flexible to other people. I've faced some really crazy situations, some scary situations, uncomfortable ones. But each time I travel, I feel like I come back a completely different person. And it's really helped me to, communicate with other people in the company. With people older than myself or younger than myself. And traveling just really, puts you out there. And so even if you don't have a job that has anything to do with traveling, traveling just helps you grow in yourself, because whenever you put yourself in new situations, that will help you grow. And for me, I had always wanted to travel for a job, but that never came to fruition. I had applied to so many different companies and positions. But as we were talking about before, I actually just recently in the past 3 months just got internally promoted at Taboola to a job where I will be traveling internationally now, which is really exciting. But it's just kind of like it happened naturally because I was following my passion, and it did take 10 years and, it might take you longer or shorter. But for me, it was like the perfect timing and perfect position. And if I had waited all these years to travel, then I wouldn't have been in the position to take this kind of job where I could be qualified and experienced enough to travel internationally.
I'm so glad that you said that, Stephanie, because I think a lot of the times people don't realize that the thing that you're very passionate about, if you stick to it, if you're consistent with it, it can be the thing that pays you. It can be the thing that is your livelihood. And I love the idea that you did not let anything really determine what it was. You didn't let anything kind of get in the way of you doing something that was important to you. And that thing led to your promotion, which is really exciting. And congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you touched on something a little bit earlier when you were talking about the challenges you faced as you were traveling. And, with the political climate as it is, do you think that's something that people should consider or be, afraid of, I guess, because you hear a lot of that. I don't want to go here. I don't want to go there. Do you think that the political climate is something that people should be cautious about when they're traveling?
Well, I'm definitely the worst person in the sense to ask about being afraid, because I'm fearless in the sense of traveling. I actually just did a United Nations tour in North Korea in May. I was in Istanbul last year right after the shooting. And I just think that, there's always something happening somewhere. Like I live in New York City, so the chances of going out and getting hit by a cab are probably greater than, getting, involved in somewhere internationally. I think you do need to, be smart and, do your research before you go somewhere. But I just think that shit happens everywhere in that sense. And I've always found that, what's being dictated to you by, the government or by the news, you're not getting to meet the people that are there, like one-on-one, the locals that live there. And most often the things that we see are not a reflection of 95% of that country. I mean, just as you see on the US news, like your personal life or stories are not necessarily reflected in that. And so when I went to Istanbul last year, a lot of people had fears around that. And I'm a, solo female traveler. But everyone was just so kind and welcoming and hospitable. Even I was in Tokyo and then I was in Seoul. And then from Seoul, I did a trip to North Korea, to the JSA. with United Nations, and obviously I'm not meeting North Koreans there in that sense, but it was still a, controlled trip where it was a little bit of a frightening experience, but it was still worth it, even though there's still stuff happening. It's, you can't just be afraid and hold yourself back from those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you talked about a little bit earlier about being organized, knowing where you're going, having a plan, could definitely help ease some of that fear. At least I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So what do you think are some, misconceptions about travel? I mean, you've been to 35 countries, 111 cities. You've been to 7 continents. So travel. What do you think are some misconceptions that you have come across or that you hear people talk about when it comes to travel?
I think a lot of people think that they have to go big or stay home type of thing. I think that people hold themselves back because they think they have to go do this whole, bougie trip to London and it's going to cost thousands of dollars. When in reality, you can, find flights on the cheap and stay in an Airbnb for, $30 a night, and do it, cheaply and smartly. Or you don't even have to go to Europe. I'm currently on a mission to get to all 50 US states, because I feel like, since I did do my Antarctica trip last year and have done a lot of big trips recently, but I thought it was just as important to focus on what I can get for $100 flight and, seeing America cheaply. And so I think a lot of people, think that they have to do some crazy international trip to travel when, you can go, do a train down to DC or a, flight to Montana and see something really cool. I'm going to Detroit the first weekend in January because I've never been to Michigan, and I hear so much about Detroit, but I've never seen it for myself. And a lot of people are like, "Ooh, Detroit! I'm going there by myself for 3 days." And but I'm excited because I just want to be able to see it with my own eyes and experience it for myself. So I would say start small, strategic but small.
Yeah, I like that, strategic. And it's so funny you should say that because I used to love, I don't know if you remember the show that Rachel Ray used to have called $40 a day or something like that.
Like one of her OG shows.
Yeah. I love that show because I used to think, wow, can she do it? Can she do it?
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that the other day. I said, I guess back, at that time, maybe $40 a day was probably the average per diem for the places she was going. But when I think about, especially the culture has changed with the food, and people love this authentic street food. You really could travel for not a lot of money. But like you said, you have to be strategic. So what does that actually look like for you? Speaking of that, you said you have a lot of spreadsheets or anything or stuff like that. But let's say, for instance, with your 50 state goal, how are you planning that?
So that came about. So I kind of have overall soul goals of I wanted to get to 7 continents. I knew I always wanted to get to 50 states and I also want to get to every country in the world. And I got to a point a year or so ago when I knew I was at 30-ish states. And so I said by the end of 2018, so I have until 12/31, 2018. And so I've always kept a Google Doc list of everything. So I live by my Google Drive. So I have a list of every, country, continent, state. And I've just been tracking that. And once I kind of set the deadline for the goal, I carved out, what states I had to get to and how I could do them. And in the past year, I've kind of always feel once you kind of put things out into the universe and start thinking about them, things will start to come to your way serendipitously that you're oh, I was just thinking about that, or I was planning on doing X or Y or Z. And that happened to me with my US states goal. So I was able to do a cross-country road trip with my best friend Molly, who was moving from Philadelphia to LA. And then my best friend Lacey, we did a road trip from Iowa to Idaho. And so kind of just looking at a map and thinking about stuff and just figuring out how I could make the different chunks of states work. And so a lot of it is, and for me, I'm a type A perfectionist, so I want to be able to figure it out all at once. But being strategic in the sense of chunking things out. So I always write out the whole thing, the whole big goal, and then just figure out how I can break it down into chunks of either states or time or money in that sense.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. I like thinking about the big picture first.
Mm-hmm.
And wrapping your head around that and then saying, okay, I'm going to break this down a little bit and little by little and figuring out the smaller steps. I'm so excited. I didn't realize that you were trying to do this before the year was up next year. That's a big goal.
Yes. Yeah. So I have 6 states left and Alaska is the big one. So I'm aiming for that next summer.
Wow. Amazing. Yes. All right. I know people listening to this show right now, they're going to want me to ask you the hacks, the true travel hacks. Now, Stephanie, I know there's some hacks that people say and they're kind of, you have to find the deals and be patient but I really want to know, I mean, you're a world traveler, so I want to know the hacks that nobody talks about. What are some of the things that people hardly ever mention? And you're like, that is a total travel hack. People need to know about this.
Yes. So my tried and true travel hack, and I don't even know if it's a hack, but when I have a trip on my mind, whether I know I want to go sooner in the next year, I always set flight price alerts on Kayak, and you can have them sent daily, weekly, monthly, and so I do that, and so I'm constantly getting notifications of different cities or countries that I want to go to, and always kind of keeping an eye on their prices if they're going up or down. I may not even end up going there, but it's just a good way to keep it at the top of your mind. And I think the Kayak app even has alerts. But that's something I do to kind of just be an educated traveler. And okay, I'm not going to book on a random Tuesday at 8 p.m. just because someone tells me to. I've tried that before. But of just, being an educated traveler and keeping an eye on that. And then, also, and I don't know if this is necessarily a hack, but just having, I think loyalty programs are so important. You might go on to a random Delta flight and you're like, oh, I never fly Delta, so I'm not going to sign up for a loyalty program. But then, 3 months later you might. And so those miles kind of add up. And so I've been a United fan forever. And so I have a great loyalty standing with them. And so I can always, be the first one on the plane and get different card member flights that aren't available to other people. And so I think those are two things of just being consistent and again, I started all this 10 years ago when I was 21 and I had no idea what it would build to. But just being able to track that stuff and keep that organized is really important.
Yeah. And you could also go back and look at the history, which is, I guess, one of the biggest things of tracking. You can see, wow, in 2014, travel prices were low, or these are the places that have, changed or have new properties that I can try. I love that tip. I definitely have used Kayak in the past to kind of watch my flights and things like that. I think I like the fact that you said that, people kind of think that, everything has to be lavish and things like that. And I don't think that, that it does. And it goes to your tip about, watching and being, kind of a student of travel. That's what it sounds like you are.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think consuming information for me has been the biggest factor. And like I said, I'm not necessarily always an expert or the smartest person in the room, but I can, consume enough information and educate myself, tailored to exactly what I want to do. And so by always just, signing up for blogs and websites, and I use Feedly to aggregate all the websites and stuff I like to read. So I'm making sure I'm keeping on top of it and listening to podcasts. Because, everyone's different. Everyone has their own thing of what they like. And so being able to listen to these things and then take what works best for you and make that work has definitely been key in living my strategic life in that sense.
So you have a lot of strategic travel, and I think that's great. I think it sounds like it's one of the biggest things that have allowed you to travel so much. So what are those places that you've been to that just surprised you? Like you did not know it was whatever it is you thought it was going to be, it totally wasn't.
Ooh, I mean, I feel like almost like every place is kind of like that because you just have so many expectations. I think Nepal was a place that really shocked and wowed me. I was doing a week-long trek to Mount Everest Base Camp. So flew into Kathmandu, and I feel like it's, Kathmandu, Nepal is like a place you always hear about, like, I don't know, Kathmandu. And so it was really cool to get to be there and to meet the people of Nepal, and like experience the Sherpa culture in the Himalayan mountains, and just how it's a completely different type of like people, and even like how they're what's the word? With like the oxygen and how they, can handle life on the mountains and stuff like that. But I think just all around the world, just like the hospitality of people. Again, you hear so many things from so many different people and sources, but once you go and meet the people face to face, regardless of whether you speak the same language, that connection just always surprises me, whether it's in, Montana, where you might have more political debates than you would in Nepal. But everyone's, typically so gracious and just great to meet face to face in person.
Yes. And it's interesting because, we talked about the perception, because we're looking at one side, a snippet of what it is like to be in this other place. And then, you would get there and you're like, this isn't like, this isn't what was presented to me or packaged to me to what it's supposed to be. I love that. It sounds like you really have an open mind when you travel, which probably is the number one thing you should have.
Absolutely.
So let's see. 2018 is coming up, and we know you're going to be hitting up 50 states, and I'm actually going to be watching this. Do you have any plans to like kind of like keep, not necessarily like a stream, but like kind of like a little trail, like I'm here. Are you going to be writing about it?
Yeah, I will definitely be writing about it. I'm actually partnering with Visit Detroit for my Michigan state trip, and getting to meet with their team and just talk to them about the development of the city and how they're kind of challenging the perception of Detroit. So I'll definitely be writing about it. I'm working on a website blog revamp, but have been writing for HuffPost about my travels for right now.
Okay. Wow, that's great. We'll definitely get all your information and figure out where we need to go to follow you. So the new year's coming up, and I'm telling you, there are people that they want to travel next year. That's their thing. Or they want to, maybe move up in their career or whatever it is that they want to do. What advice do you have for people this year in 2018?
My advice would be to setting your intentions for the year, and just kind of putting it out there. I think a lot of people set specific New Year's resolutions, but again, just kind of like taking a step back and thinking about your overall picture, and thinking about how quickly this year flew by. And I feel like I always try to keep that perspective of oh my gosh, this past year flew by. So how am I going to make the most of this year, knowing that truly every single day counts? For me, I don't watch really any TV or movies. All of my time outside of work is dedicated to, kind of living my best life and figuring out how I can be not only the best in my career, but travel wise and writing wise as well. So really just taking a step back, setting your kind of overall vision and intentions, and then break it down into monthly chunks of how you can get there. So it might seem kind of overwhelming, being like, oh, I want to be at this place in 1 year. But if you break it down into 12 months of, okay, this month I'm going to listen to 6 podcasts, and the next month I'll read 3 books, and the next month I'll go to a networking event, or whether it's saving money or babysitting on the side or writing on Medium. I just feel like there's so much unlimited potential these days. We have a computer in our pockets. It's so cool to have an iPhone, and I feel like we don't take enough advantage of how much information that we can really learn and consume and put to good use.
Very true. Great piece of advice. I got to tell you guys, she just gave us some really good advice, but I found a hidden gem in that. And I love the way you put it. You said, I don't really watch TV or do, really basically waste my time. But you're so gracious about it. Basically, guys, I know you heard that, but what she's saying is you can't sit on the couch and think you're going to change the world or travel or whatever it is you want to do. So that was like a little mini interpretation for me.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's very, a lot. Yeah, no, a lot of people do say things like, how do you have time to do that? I'm like, I truly don't. I've never binge watched a show on Netflix ever. I do, I'm trying to be better about watching more TV or relaxing more. But it does take a lot of, extra work and time outside of work, work outside of work in that sense. But it's definitely worth putting the time in, because now, looking back 10 years later, I'm like, wow, I'm really happy I put in that work now. So
yeah, put in the work on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to ask my guests before we wrap up, because we are getting to that time. I really want, I'd like to ask my guests before we wrap up, one question. And the question really is, what is it that if you knew then what you know now, what would you do different? And so that means then could be last month, then could be 10 years ago. But my question is really centered around what would you tell yourself then, or what did you wish you know, or the hindsight of your situation in your life?
Yes, that's such a good question. I guess I would take it back, since my theme has kind of been reflecting on my past 10 years in New York. So when I was 21 years old, just graduated from college and starting my career in New York, if I knew everything now that or if I knew then what I knew now, that would be insane. I think, experience is definitely the best teacher in that sense. But just to give some context, when I was 21, it was 2008. Social media was kind of just coming to fruition with Twitter and LinkedIn, and Facebook was just opening up to non-college students. And it would be just to really invest in like the connections on social media. That social media isn't necessarily about the number of followers or likes, but it's about the sense of community that you create. And so not necessarily just going after specific numbers, but taking time to focus on the quality over quantity.
Yeah, I like that. And I do think it's really interesting how the narrative has changed, because there's so many people who have bought the followers or not made those connections, and it leads to absolutely nothing. And these platforms they're starting to catch on to that. And those people, who we thought had all these followers and engagement, they really don't have it. And so I do love that piece of advice, to just focus on that, which honestly could be a whole nother podcast about using social media to network, but we will save that. We'll definitely save that for next time. Stephanie, tell everybody where they can find you, where they can follow you throughout the year as you visit your 50 states. If they need to find out more and they want for more information, where do we go?
Thank you very much. Well, on Twitter, I am at Strategic Steph. So I'm always sharing my own content, others' content, and helpful podcasts. So when I listen to your podcast, I always share my favorites as well. On Instagram, I am at Strategic Steph Travels. So that's where I go through my past trips and my current trips. And on Facebook, I am at Strategic Steph Travels as well. And if anyone had any specific questions or wanted to chat, again, I don't have a product or I'm not selling anything, but I always just love to help people kind of figure out what they're doing career and mentorship wise. So my email is strategicsteph@gmail.com. I am working on a website revamp, but you can also find my articles on Huffington Post, huffingtonpost.com/Stephanie-Huston, Huston.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.